Good afternoon, everybody. Happy Thursday. Of course, another game on the horizon for Norwich City this Saturday. It's another long old trip, this time to Sunderland, who, of course, are flying high at the top of the Championship. I think they're fourth at the moment, so not going to be an easy test. Plenty to get through in this sort of next 40 minutes or so that we'll be live. We'll be talking everything from January transfer windows to Angus Gunn, which I think is probably going to be the place we'll start. Adam Harvey joined by my colleague, Connor Southwell. Of course, we want your comments, questions, score predictions, and we'll work through those as we go through the show. Connor, as I just hinted at, I think the place to go is our good friends, the FA, and what they keep doing at the moment to Norwich City. Of course, Angus Gunn charged with misconduct for an altercation in the tunnel at half-time in that pretty grim 3-0 defeat at Loftus Road. Of course, we don't quite know the outcomes of it yet. I think we've got a little bit of inclination to what might happen this afternoon, but what's your thoughts on that when that news broke, Connor? Because this is another strange one, because obviously we had the Kenny McLean situation. That comes out, 24 hours after the game, and then he's suspended a few hours before the game against Portsmouth. This is, 10 days on, and they've decided to bring out this one. So what do you make of the timescales, everything around this situation at the moment?
Yeah, the timescale is really bizarre, isn't it? I think that's as Johannes said yesterday, I don't really or can't really understand why you're in a position where you have a decision made 72 hours after a game where, Kenny McLean had to be banned in time for that Tuesday game, so he definitely didn't play, and that was the process that the FA went through. And then 2 games on and 10 days on, we're back in the same place with Angus Gunn having a charge. Now, if the case is that they've been investigating this for a period of time, then I think that's fine. But I think we probably need to have some sort of transparency and communication that an investigation is going on, and then obviously a subsequent announcement as to whether they've elected to charge or not, and not merely an announcement upon a player being charged, because you get a situation like this where it just looks a little bit bizarre that 2 games and 10 days on, a player is being charged for an incident of a game that everyone considers to be in the past. So yeah, the whole process again, I think, probably exposes what is a pretty archaic and pretty out of date situation that the FA are overseeing at this moment in time, be that the communication surrounding it or the actual process itself. I mean, I don't know who is earning extra overtime in time for Christmas in the FA discipline department to keep rewatching that game. I watched it once. That was more than enough for me, to be honest. I struggled to watch structure it in the 90 minutes that unfolded. But yeah, look, I think it's a difficult one because we're not 100% sure what Angus Gunn is being accused of. I think we've got a fair idea, but you can't say definitively until obviously the FA publish their written reasons and put their evidence to it or not. And again, also, I think to have a process, excuse me, whereby someone's getting charged 10 days after an event, but they've got 2 days to respond to that charge, again, to me, feels a little bit contradictory. So yeah, look, it's not ideal, but without knowing what Angus Gunn, or without knowing 100% what Angus Gunn has done, it's difficult to really pass judgment on his behaviour. If he's behaved poorly, then look, it's fair enough. It happens. Everyone knows the rules and complies with it. But yeah, I think from a timing perspective, it's less than ideal. But yeah, I think the final case in point is I would be absolutely shocked if Angus Gunn is available for Norwich City this weekend. I think that's probably the long and short of the matter.
Yeah, which obviously lends itself to Mark's question here. Will Gunn get to play this weekend, or do we think he'll be suspended by the end of today? I'm hoping he doesn't get a ban. I mean, it feels like we'll probably get an answer this afternoon, though, Connor.
Yeah, well, he had today to respond. So I think the expectation is that there will be an outcome today. And then obviously it's up to Norwich to whether they decide to accept whatever the verdict is and whatever the sanction is, or whether they decide to contest it. I suspect they will not contest it, because I don't think there's much point, if I'm honest, and it just prolongs the I guess the process, and it probably casts a little bit more doubt on whether he can travel for Saturday. They're obviously going to be travelling tomorrow, so that would then probably involve him having to travel to Wearside, and yeah, all of it becomes a little bit messy. So I think they will accept the punishment that is given to Angus Gunn, and hopefully we're talking about one game rather than multiple games. But obviously we'll see if that's confirmed later this afternoon, as probably we'd expect.
Yeah, in terms of Jeffman's point, I mean, the wording on the club's thing is the goalkeeper allegedly acted in an improper manner around the tunnel area at half-time in this fixture. So, of course, we don't know the ins and outs of what's been said or what's happened, which is kind of where the up in the air feeling is around this. I mean, Torp even said yesterday they need to look at the evidence, what's been said, as to how they would obviously act upon a response in this. But, Conor, I suppose that lends itself to the point that Torp actually said in his press conference yesterday around clarification of the rules and what needs to be outline, because at the moment it feels like there's kind of a little bit of a wishy-washy line almost around it, where nobody really knows kind of the ins and outs, and Norwich are getting random charges that they're not really aware of. So, I mean, do the FA need to come out and make these rules more aware for football clubs?
Yeah, I think so. And again, how long can you retrospectively ban someone for? What is the window in time? Is it 10 days? Is it 2 weeks? Is it a month? Nobody really knows that. And even I think when looking at sort of the Kenny McLean incident, and obviously that's a different case in point because that's violent conduct rather than misconduct. But even that process is just a little bit up in the air in terms of how it works, who actually gets a view on it. It seems to be, in McLean's case, that kind of free former referees get to pass judgment on whether or not a player is banned for 3 games. That feels a little bit odd to me. These are people who aren't currently active in the game. I think you'd be much better putting it to 3 different referees who are currently in the game, in the FL, and sort of leaning on that, because it's difficult, I think, to have an independent commission that is called FA Independent Commission, because that sort of creates the idea. I'm not for any stretch in the imagination saying it is the case, but I think it can create the idea that it isn't totally independent when clearly we know it is. And let's be clear here, there's no conspiracy against Norwich City. It is for whatever reason this game has been combed through more than others, and whether that is just because there was a referee assessor who was, I don't know, particularly more stringent than other ones have been. But yeah, it does seem odd that you can get to a stage where 10 days after a game, 2 games which Angus Gunn has played in, you're in a situation where he could then be missing that one because of a game three games ago. So yeah, I mean, it's turned into a bit of a game from hell, hasn't it, from Norwich City? And we still haven't reached a stage where the FA maybe have looked at what happened after the game on Sunday, or the bookings that Norwich City got at Portsmouth. I think they got 5 on that night, didn't they? So all of these things are probably open to it, and yeah, it's frustrating. But what I would say on the Gunn thing, I think, it is difficult to say what has done or what he's done. But from sort of my understanding of it, I don't think it's quite for the reasons that the Jeffman stated there. I don't think it's any sort of altercation or having a go at the referee, because quite frankly, those type of situations, he would have been sent off straight away, because there would have been a referee that would have seen it at the time that would have sent him off. So this is something that clearly the referee hasn't seen, and is something that has happened. So yeah, we'll learn more evidence of that when the written reasons get published. And we've only just in the last few days or so seen the Kenny McLean, which I see have now been clipped up and shared on social media, but we've only in recent days seen those published for the first incident. So I think we've got probably a period of weeks until we definitively find out exactly the reasoning or why he has been charged in the way that he has been. But yeah, I think the whole process as a whole, and I'm not saying that the FA are right or wrong to charge Gunn in particular, but I think there does need to be a bit more communication about the process, because to be in a situation where nobody knows anything and then 10 days later there's a charge issued, I think is pretty archaic. I think we're beyond the stage now where we need to start thinking about announcing investigations and looking into matters and that kind of thing. I think that would be better and provide a lot more clarity to everybody involved in the process, rather than what we've got at the moment, which feels pretty archaic. And as Johannes has, I think, articulated quite well over both of these cases, it shouldn't be the situation in professional football that we're 48 hours really from the game kicking off today. We still don't know for sure if Angus Gunn is going to play or not. That's not a situation that we should be dealing with. And I think in the McLean case in particular, to have a situation where the day of a game, a player has travelled, a team is prepared for said player to play, and then that gets thrown out of the window a few hours later, that can't happen. That shouldn't happen in a league like the Championship, which is as good and as competitive and as well watched as it is around the world. And I think what probably would have been more pragmatic and more sensible is, if, as is the case in other European countries, that McLean on that occasion would have been allowed to play the Portsmouth game, and then the ban comes in. And obviously, if he gets a red card in that Portsmouth game, that gets added on, and we're talking about 7 games instead of 4. I think that's the situation that we should be in. So yeah, I think maybe what the last 10 days have exposed is just how out of date the FA rules feel like at this moment in time. But yeah, it's still a mystery as to why or who or where these situations have been combed out of, because and I'm not saying this is the case, but I can understand why Norwich fans feel at the moment like their club is being picked out in particular. We know that's not the case, and we know there isn't, it's not Terry Butcher and Matt Holland and John Walk on this FA panel going over that FA going over that QPR game. But it does feel like at the moment that they are receiving more of these sanctions than perhaps other Championship clubs have done previously for similar offences. And I think that is the one that probably will frustrate Norwich fans more than anything. So yeah, that's the view on it. And obviously, if Norwich lose Angus Gunn this weekend, that's a major shame because we saw how big an impact that played earlier on in the season with injuries.
Yeah, that was kind of going to be my next point. I mean, opportunities looks like it might knock again potentially for George Long for another game. I mean, rightfully or wrongfully, there was a lot of criticism around his performances when Gunn was out, and we had a lot of debate, and we've spoken a lot around this. We don't really need to go back over all of that ground we've already spoken around. But I suppose, how big an impact will this have, particularly going to a place like the Stadium of Light? They've not lost at home all season. Really going to be a tough assignment to then lose, your number one goalkeeper. It's not going to be helped.
No, it's tough, and it's a shame really, because if we're talking about a ban, then the ban should come in for the game after the one that was relevant, I think. But I understand why that can't always be the case. Look, I think it's clearly, and we've said this pretty openly. It's a drop in quality, isn't it, in goalkeepers, and we understand why that's the case because of where Norwich are financially and all the different elements. And you can't have a number two that's as good as your number one, in my view, because we saw the sort of impact that played out between Tim Krul and Angus Gunn. It wasn't good probably for the goalkeeping department as a whole. It wasn't good for the team. It created a lot of uncertainty in head coach's position, and it prevented Norwich from really achieving a consistency. So that is why there is a drop off. But yeah, look, I think from George Long's perspective, what is it, 12 goals conceded in 7 championship games. I think he'll be, as he has been previously, disappointed with how the previous spell went, and he'll be quite keen to try and step up and prove why maybe he was offered a new contract or all of those things. I think what I would say is I don't think Angus has, up to his usual standards, had the season that anyone would have hoped, and it's always quite dangerous, I think, with goalkeepers just reading into sort of shot stopping data and that kind of thing. But the evidence suggests it's not been a campaign that has been anywhere near close to what he did last season, where it felt like he was one of the best, or at least one of the most consistent in the Championship. And look, there are reasons for that. He's clearly had injuries, and you never quite know what's going on behind the scenes with players and in their private lives and whatnot. But it hasn't been, for whatever reason, the Angus Gunn that we saw last season. So, he's made errors himself. I thought with QPR, the third goal, I think it was the third goal, he seemed to take a while to respond to Coley's shot. And I think I might have said to you on the day, if that was George Long, can you imagine sort of the levels of criticism that he would get? So, yeah, look, it's been tough because it does feel like whenever George Long's in goal, there is kind of a micro analysis that happens, and every goal that Norwich concedes is as a result of George Long. When sometimes that is the case, admittedly, you look at the Sheffield Wednesday set piece, and that was a goalkeeping error. But otherwise, you look at, for example, the goal that Norwich conceded at Stoke, where there was a lot of talk about his position and all that sort of stuff, which just doesn't happen when Angus Gunn concedes a goal to the same level. So, I think as always with these things, and when there are extremes in football, there's probably a reality in the middle. No one, I think, would suggest for a minute that he's anywhere close to where Angus Gunn is as a goalkeeper. But equally, is he the worst goalkeeper that's ever played football? Probably not. So, yeah, look, it's not ideal for Norwich City, because whenever you're without one of your frontline options, and they're seeing it at the moment with Josh Sargent and Kenny McLean, they're now without Angus Gunn again. This is might be without Angus Gunn again. This is not the situation that you want to be in ahead of a festive schedule. So, I think it's like he's not won a league game in. I was just trying to check there. I think in over a year. I think, if that's right. Obviously, he's not played much in that time, so it's an unfair stat to level at him, and it's not all his fault, but. Yeah, it clearly, when you're without your best players, it makes a tough task even tougher, and that's the case obviously without Sargent and without McLean as well. So yeah, if that is the case and that news gets confirmed today, then it's a blow for Norwich City, no doubt about it.
Yeah, and of course, in terms of their travel so far this season, not been overly great. I think it's just 2 wins on the road in the Championship so far, Derby and Coventry, of course. That's been probably 2-3 months now since they last won on the road. So it's difficult. And obviously we saw the approach at Portsmouth, and you can talk around kind of whether you agreed with that or not. Obviously it got them a point in a difficult situation off the back of that QPR game. And of course we had the Burnley game at home more recently, where we sort of saw more back to the Norwich that we have seen under Johannes Torup so far this season. But in terms of this game, going to the Stadium of Light, as I mentioned, sort of at the top there, they've not lost at home all season. They're in really good form. Torup said himself, they're the best transitional team in the league. So how do they approach this? Do they go back to what they've done at Portsmouth, or do you see somewhere in between, back to Hofball? Where's kind of your head at for this one?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think the truth is probably it's probably similar to Burnley. Actually, I think I've said this on a few occasions. I think actually Norwich are probably better suited to playing the more technical teams that want to have the ball and want to try and dominate them. Even though I know what you said about Sunderland being relatively transitional, but think you look at the numbers, they are a team who have tried to sort of have possession to varying sort of levels of success. I would say they're maybe not as contingent on it as other teams, but actually you look at the situations where they have been given the ball. Bristol City at home, that was a 1-1 draw. They had 66%. They drew at home to West Brom. Everyone draws to West Brom, but they drew 0-0 to West Brom and had 57%. So, it is interesting. I think maybe how Norwich City try and play it. I think they'll probably be in a position where they'll be allowed the ball, and then it's about managing some of them transitions. And look, if we see the Norwich side that were as good in their build-up phases as they were in the first half against Burnley, then they're capable of coping with that and managing that. But the biggest kind of key, I guess, as has felt like the case all season, really, is going to come down to how well Norwich City can keep the ball in those areas. Because what we know is, and what Johannes sort of highlighted yesterday is, if they do make some of those errors we've seen that they're prone to making, then Sunderland have the players and the talent to spring into that and to really punish them. And I remember going to the stadium like last year, and Sunderland were scintillating that day. I think we probably left thinking, "Oh, yeah, they're going to be, potentially a Premier League team." And actually, they probably had a similar type of season to the one that it feels like Norwich are having at this moment in time. So look, it's going to be tough. I think it's probably like last weekend going to be a good test to see where Norwich City are at. But yeah, at some point they need to change the narrative around their away form. You're right, and I think maybe what's most perplexing about it is it feels like Championship wide away form hasn't been great. I think I think Burnley have now taken the most points on the road after their win last weekend. But I don't think there's any team who've taken 2 points on the road this year, which is a rarity at this stage in the season. I mean, Norwich, as bad as they've been on the road, I think were before, well, last time I checked, which would have been after their last away game. So obviously there's been a few games since then, so it might have changed, but they were mid-table, they were 13th. So the fact that that's a reality, as bad as they've been in the road, no win in 7, I think maybe documents it. So look, I would expect a degree more pragmatism, but I don't think we're going to see a repeat of Portsmouth maybe ever, or hopefully ever again, but particularly this weekend, because I think it's a game that probably suits itself more to Norwich City playing a bit more football, with obviously the recognition that, of course, they're going to need to manage some of Sunderland's attacking talent. You look at the names that they've got: Joe Bellingham, Chris Rigg, very young, talented player who's been brilliant. Patrick Roberts, we know from his spell at Norwich. Isidore up front is a good player. They've got options, and it's going to be about managing those transitions. So I think it will come down to Norwich City's quality on the ball, which is probably why I can't really see them going there and playing Ashley Barnes as the sole striker. I could be wrong, but I don't see it at this stage. So yeah, it's going to be interesting. What about you, Adam? It feels like there's a halfway house to be found, probably, between achieving some of that pragmatism without completely compromising what they want to do from their sort of principle sort of base.
Yeah, I think there's obviously a balance that's got to be struck. Johannes is still learning, as we kind of mentioned, throughout the last podcast. This is obviously his first time in England, his first time in the Championship, and maybe that QPR game, some of the naivety that maybe was shown, I suppose, in the way that they approached it, and I suppose QPR kind of exploited that, and I think we're starting to see now a theme of signs being nullified a little bit more by opposition teams as well, and that's grown a little bit of frustration in his game, as I think we kind of maybe saw even with the goal at the weekend, the fact that he was trying to take men on, probably just to try and get himself up the pitch, and obviously that led to the break. So yeah, I'm intrigued to see how he plays it. Obviously, don't want to go there and shut up shop like they did at Portsmouth, because that was a turgid game of football. And I still think Sunderland, with their quality, would have enough in the tank to find a goal from somewhere and win that game. So I don't think that's the approach they can take. But going there and be too expansive. And I think they've also got the quality to punish you. So it's got to be somewhere in the middle. In terms of those stats you mentioned, Norwich 13th currently in the away table with 10 points. As you mentioned, Burnley on 21 points from 11 games. So even they haven't managed the 2 point per game ratio usually. I mean, even Leeds are intriguing, only 14 points on the road from 10 games. So, I mean, that probably does sort of echo that sentiment you made around teams struggling a little bit more on the road than at home this season, which is intriguing, I suppose, because it's not something that you usually see. Moving this conversation on a little bit, just wanted to get your sort of feelings and thoughts on the centre-back positions at the moment. Obviously, Jose Cordoba got his first goal, and I think that's his first ever goal in senior football at the weekend. And we obviously seen the upside of his return in terms of, the defensive side of the game. Obviously, at Portsmouth, kept a clean sheet, and I don't think he wasn't in the QPR squad, was he, from the start? I think I'm right in saying so. So we've sort of seen the upside of that. But then obviously we also have the conversation around Callum Doyle. He'll be returning back to the Stadium of Light, and we all probably feel that his left back sort of performances haven't been as good at the left centre back position. So I mean, where's your head at in terms of that sort of debate at the moment? Because I mean, Ben Krezene is someone who's not seen a lot of for quite a while. So your thoughts on that situation at the moment?
Yeah, I think the back four that Norwich played last weekend is the best back four they have in terms of creating a balance in the team. And it's difficult, I think, when maybe you look at the goals that Norwich City are conceding to come to that conclusion and say, well, actually, there's so much competition and quality in the back four. It feels contradictory, but I think Norwich probably have conceded more goals than actually their defence has warranted. Obviously, they've conceded a lot of set-piece goals, which contribute to that number as well. But yeah, they're shipping too many goals, full stop. I'm maybe in the minority to an extent that I haven't actually minded Callum Doyle at left back. Obviously, I know that there is he is a centre back, but so much of that and so much I think of what Torup is trying to do at Norwich generally, it's risk and reward, and I quite like what Doyle gives them in possession as a left back, probably more than the centre back, if I'm being honest. But clearly the risk of putting him there is you leave a big space in behind that teams can go and exploit and go and attack, and he doesn't have that level of pace to defend in that type of way, which is why Cordoba should be there on the cover and all of that type of stuff. But I think, and we've seen it after maybe the Callum Fisher experiment at left back. I think he gives Norwich better balance. I think he gives them proper progression in terms of possession on the left side, and it's risk and reward, and it's about Norwich City working themselves to a stage where they get a lot more out of that from a possession-based perspective than maybe the risk side of that, where he's constantly 1v1 defending counter-attacks. So, I don't mind the back four as it is. I think the right back debate is probably gone now, if I'm honest. I think Fisher, for the way that Norwich want to play, obviously there'll be situations and games where Jack Stacey is better suited. But I feel at this moment in time, and for the game that we're talking about, actually, I think maybe potentially the next two could be a lot more suited to Jack Stacey. But I think where Norwich are going to go, and there's going to be a high sort of demand on their possession game for the reasons that we've outlined, I think Callum Fisher suits in there. So I'd probably leave the back four as is, barring any injuries that we don't know about. Because I think it's probably Norwich's best in possession. Clearly, there's some defensive work to do, but I think that's as a team more generally. And I think they don't look as good defensively without Kenny McLean in there and the structure that he provides. And I think probably, Adam, like most people of a Norwich persuasion, it was quite the relief to hear Johannes Torup speak about the need for a defensive midfielder. Feels like they haven't really had one since Alex Tettey left the club. I think he'd probably still get a game now if he was playing and if he was in the squad. So, yeah, all of that sort of adds to the balance. But, yeah, in terms of the left-back one, I think for the way they want to play at this moment in time, with obviously the opportunity then to get Cordoba in the team, I'm actually pretty okay with Callum Doyle at left-back. I don't think it's Norwich City's biggest issue at this moment in time, if I'm completely honest.
Yeah, agreed. Of course, we'll talk around those transfer things in just a moment. Before we do that, just talk a little bit around Sunderland and their season so far. I mean, obviously, when we met them, what would that have been? March time last year. I remember they just sacked Mick Beale. They had quite a long period where they had no manager at all. And we all know the turbulence and kind of situation around Sunderland over the last few years. There was obviously that burner account that was supposedly Mick Beale. There was the Netflix documentaries. They've kind of been a club that's always had something surrounding them. But it feels like this season they've kind of almost settled that a little bit, and they've obviously got a new manager in LeBreeze who came in June, and those sort of younger players that we saw the talents of last season, the likes of Chris Rigg, Joe Bellingham. There's plenty we could go through in that size. Sirkin at left back, plenty of good talent there, but maybe they weren't consistent enough. And I sort of mentioned a little bit on the last podcast because I think there's a lot to kind of draw similarities between the two sides and where Norwich are at the moment, maybe in terms of a lot of younger players that are sort of trying to make those first steps, and you see in the quality at different times, but also that sort of moments in games where they might switch off, and it's just about consistency, and eventually they'll get there. And I thought Torup was actually pretty good on that yesterday in his press conference, mentioned, that Norwich will eventually evolve to an area where when they do have these situations that happen again, they'll learn from it and they'll know how to deal with it. And Sunderland obviously done that last weekend when they were 2-0 down at Swansea, came back to win 3-2, and sort of beating adversity and being able to overcome that. It feels like they've got it going this season. What's your sort of take on their season so far? Do you think they're going to be in the top 6 at the end of the season, I suppose, as well?
Yeah, well, I mean, firstly, completely echo what you said, and it was interesting to hear sort of Johannes speak about that yesterday in terms of how Sunderland are almost showing Norwich the way of how to build potentially what he wants to build. I mean, they finished what was it 16th last season, and have this season gone on, and that partly is because they've obviously acquired a coach that has been able to get a tune out of those players, but it's equally because those players, Bellingham, who's having a much better season, even the likes of Dan Neil in there, Chris Rigg clearly is an unbelievable talent. I think that what I've seen of him, he will go on to play at a top level, injuries providing. So they're a really good team, and partly of what they've been able to do is, yes, they've been put in a structure that enables that, but also, as Johannes spoke about in depth, and we've got obviously the quotes of that coming out a little bit later today. They've got players who now are familiar with the type of situations that they're being put in on a regular basis, but they've got the tools that maybe to deal with them in the way that Norwich don't. And actually, the Swansea example is particularly pertinent, isn't it? Because you think about maybe the moments, and maybe there's a slight sort of flip side to this with Norwich, because Norwich have struggled probably when they've been ahead in games and maintaining that intensity and actually managing the dips of games that we've, like we saw on Sunday, where their performance dips, they drop to a pretty low level. And it's actually about sort of managing that dip a little bit. For Sunderland, it was maybe a little bit the same last year. I remember a lot of discourse about maybe their lack of striking options, about how young the team was. And this season they added Chris Mepham, they added Alan Brown. They've got players in there who have shored it up a little bit to help some of those young players and help create, I guess, a base level for those youngsters, consistency where they do jump up and down, because naturally you get that with young players. They could provide a little bit more of a stability, and that's probably the imbalance that Norwich have got at the moment. They've got maybe too many players who jump up and down in their performance levels, and maybe not as many of them at this stage who are able to maybe prevent that dip from being as drastic as it is for Norwich at the moment, where they look brilliant for first half against Burnley, and the final half an hour is a real struggle and a real slog. So it's about achieving a balance and a consistency. And when you've got players like Sunderland have, which are clearly very talented, Norwich have clearly very talented players as well, it's about time, and sometimes you have to take a step back to then go forward. And it feels like they've done that. And yeah, it's a credit to Labrie and the job that he's done there, because they've been excellent. I don't think they're maybe as attractive on the eye as what they have been under Tony Mowbray or even Alex Neil in years gone by, but they're effective and as Johannes said, extremely dangerous in transitional moments. So I think top 6 wise, it's going to be interesting. I think they've probably got enough now to cling in there in terms of talent and way of playing, and momentum as well. Like you say, they've not lost at home this season, and that is, as we know from last season, an important record to try and create if you want to get in there. So yeah, I think they've got the talent, the coach, and the structure to keep themselves in that playoff picture. Whether it will be 4th, 3rd, 6th, who knows? But because there are some very good teams at this level, but I think they probably will struggle to maintain the level that they're at at the moment. As we've seen, really, they had a blistering start with top of the league by quite a considerable distance. Now Sheffield United have come up the track, Leeds have come up the track. I think Middlesbrough will. Obviously, Burnley are up there as well in terms of efficiency. I think that feels like a pretty clear top 4 in terms of quality. So it's up to Sunderland to try and prove that they're in that conversation. And if not, then there's the 5th and the 6th spot, which I think are probably a little bit more open. So I think they have got enough. And this is what makes Saturday so interesting for Norwich City. It's about whether, like Burnley, they can prove that they can maybe stay at those levels where they can compete with a team that is in that top 6 picture for longer than maybe they did last weekend, because they completely outplayed Burnley for 45 minutes. The second 45 they didn't. So it's now for Norwich City to try and follow where Sunderland are at. And it was interesting to hear, I think, Johannes say that they're 1 or 2 steps behind them in their development. And I think that's probably a pretty honest assessment as to where both clubs find themselves at this moment in time.
Yeah, certainly going to be a dangerous team and probably a good benchmark for Norwich's progress in recent times. Okay, I suppose it's that point where, as you can see with the comments, a lot of them are surrounding the January transfer window and maybe situations in regards to that. I mean, Peter makes his point. He feels Norwich need to sign a forward and a left-back in January, and that left-back role is obviously something that came up this week. There was a link surfaced to a 27-year-old left-back. His name is Marlon, Brazilian, of course. Intriguing, I suppose. He's played 28 games over there in the top flight. I think he's had 2 red cards already, so he's probably fitting quite well with Norwich in terms of the FA bans at the moment. But that situation, obviously, Paddy obviously got a little bit of kind of insight yesterday on that. Feels like it's one that's maybe on a target list, but not one they're going to be active on in January, Connor.
Yeah, I mean, look, they're active in South America. They have been for a long time. They've got two active scouts recruitment team in that area. They haven't signed anyone, I think, for a few windows now in there, and that's for a multitude of reasons. It can be quite expensive and it can be quite complex because you've got players that maybe are owned by different agents and different clubs, and it can become quite difficult to get them out. But so the opportunity's got to be 100% right. But I think I would drill back into the strategy really, which is a 27-year-old for what was it, £4 million? I think the report said initially that's not where Norwich City are at in terms of their strategy, because you're not seeing, or you do well, I think, to see any sort of return on that price tag for somebody of that age. He's clearly an interesting player and a talented player. I would suggest he's probably one that Norwich have watched, like several in South America and in Brazil in particular. But I think the initial report linked him with like 6 Brazilian clubs or something like that. And if you want, this may be a word of warning for anybody ahead of January. If you're reading reports and it's listing Norwich City amongst 7, 8, 9, 4, 5, 6 different clubs, then you can probably say it's been placed there as a little bit of kite flying. I think he's out of contract in a couple of years, so I'm sure that is particularly pertinent. But yeah, he's not one at this stage, with the understanding that things evolve and change, that we would expect to see rock up at Carrow Road next month. I think they've probably got priorities in other positions. But like you say, if Callum Doyle returns to Manchester City, they're going to need a left back in the summer. You would suggest it would make sense that they are actively scouting and watching left backs ahead of that, and we know that they plan windows in advance. So yeah, that would be my reading of that particular situation.
Of course, talk was pretty open in that he feels Norwich need a defensive midfielder, which, as you mentioned at the top, Tetty is maybe the last one they had. I mean, Ollie Skip was here for only sort of just under a year, obviously, in terms of the loan situation, and they certainly never replaced him. So, as Jeffman says, it's refreshing to hear Johannes Off-Torp acknowledge we need a defensive midfielder. Do you think that will be a January target or a summer target? Joe in agreement that Norwich could do with a defensive midfielder. Certainly from sort of the sound bits you hear from within the club, it's certainly an area they're going to try and target, I think, in January. I mean, there's a few, I believe, in League One they're intrigued by as well. So where's your head at in terms of kind of that situation, Connor, and the defensive midfielder?
Yeah, I think interesting for me is obviously last January we had the Jonathan Varane situation, didn't we? Where he was a very live, very active target. I think if the fee would have been what it was to actually take him to QPR in the summer, I think we'd be talking about him as a Norwich City player, and that was with the view, obviously, to the long term. I actually think, and I think I said this on a podcast, or I said it somewhere, or wrote about it somewhere, but I actually think maybe one of the sort of quietest bits of Norwich City's transfer or summer transfer window was maybe the hole they left themselves in that area, because there's not really, as we've seen when Kenny McLean's been absent, someone to really step into that role with the same level of, or same even attributes, but same qualities and same sort of stability that they offer. And I think that was a little bit of an opportunity missed, because it's made them so dependent and reliant on Kenny McLean that you get yourself in a situation where if he's suspended, then it becomes very difficult for Norwich City to win a game. So it was probably a little bit of a surprise for me that there wasn't one or more chatter about that in the summer. They obviously prioritised other positions as they had to do, but I think it's probably been on the long-term list for a while. This window probably does feel like the right one to try and add one. And then obviously you give them 6 months ahead of next season to really bed in, and that might not mean playing consistent championship football and starting every week, but it gives you the option maybe to do a little bit of what they haven't done so well, which is to dig in games, to get results over the line, to help shore things up a little bit in the meantime. And then obviously with the hope that then they could affect things, because, I know we speak about this, a comparison a lot, but you look at Daniel Farke and Alex Tettey and how initially he started to try and play without Alex Tettey and realised pretty quickly at this level that you need someone like that, someone who can be a little bit of an anchor, who can, maybe it doesn't give you as much in possession, isn't as progressive, but is clever off the ball, is someone that doesn't want to go and join attacking phases, someone that will hold their position and help maintain a discipline to what Norwich City are trying to do. So yeah, it's got to be financially viable, and clearly I think it's got to be the right profile. But yeah, this does feel like the window to sign that position. I think what intrigues me is probably how many we see in this window. It's clear we're not going to see a mass arrival of 7 or 8. That would be mad. But I think what's going to be interesting is the decisions that Norwich take in the positions that matter. Clearly, I think feels obvious to me that they need a right winger. I think that's pretty evident, particularly with the situations around Kate Gordon, around Christian Fashnak, who I'd be shocked if he was still here at the end of January, the way things are going at this moment in time. And the striker one's interesting because I think it's easy to look at it right now and say they need a striker, but Josh Sargent returns a new year. If Ashley Barnes doesn't budge and he doesn't go anywhere, you've still got 3 in the building. I'm not quite sure I see them doing anything up front, if I'm honest, because you'd have Sargent, Cianats and Barnes. Without shifting one of those, it would be a little bit of an odd one, I think, to do. So, yeah, I'm maybe looking at defensive midfield and right sort of wing, really, as maybe the areas that feel to me like they're probably at the biggest priority at this moment in time, with obviously a recognition that clearly with players out of contract and all the things that are going to happen in the summer, the reality is they're probably going to need a goalkeeper. They're probably going to need another centre-back. They're probably going to need midfielders. So it feels like you probably can fill a few of those gaps to save yourself some work in the summer where you need to prioritise maybe other areas of the pitch. So those are the two key ones that I'm looking. But yeah, clearly you could throw goalkeeper, left-back, centre-back, striker. You could throw a lot of them into the January mix, but it's a tough window anyway, let alone trying to do 3, 4, 5 deals. So I think it will be about quality maybe rather than quantity for Norwich City. And if that leaves holes in the squad that are there to be filled in the long term, then I think that maybe is going to be the case.
Yeah, agreed on that. Shaney saying, I feel we need more impact players to come off the bench. As of now, the Hoff doesn't exactly have anyone on the bench that can come to the pitch and bring that wow factor, which I suppose maybe lends itself to that right winger situation you mapped out there. It does feel like Norwich have maybe not got those options. Kate Gordon wasn't brilliant when he came on against Burnley. Obviously, Fashnak's not been in the squad for quite a while, and Onel seems to be trialled a little bit more sort of through the middle at different points now, right? Maybe more than out wide. So yeah, I suppose of all that situation there. I mean, in terms of money they might spend in January, I mean, do you see the club sort of, I suppose, putting money on the table for players in this window? Obviously, we spoke to Mark Atanasio in sort of the post AGM, and he sort of mapped out that they'd be quite open to spending a little bit. But of course, there is certain rules they have to abide by in terms of profit and sustainability. And we know obviously the homegrown situation as well. So I suppose in terms of those targets, where do you see them coming from and what sort of value, I suppose?
Yeah, well, again, it was interesting what you said yesterday on the domestic market, wasn't it? I think it was probably pretty pertinent. It's a really difficult market for Norwich to utilise because of the cost, to be frank. Because this was something that Stuart Webber used to explain in quite a lot of detail. You could go abroad and get someone who is of a similar quality and similar standing to somebody who's playing in the Championship and probably pay 10 times less than you would do if you were buying someone from the same level and from the same league. So that's why it becomes difficult. But clearly Norwich have a homegrown quota as well that they need to maintain, and they're very tight on that as it is at this moment in time. So that's going to be a trade-off that they're going to need to manage, I think, throughout January. And that's why, it's all very well and good talking about Kate Gordon going back to Liverpool or Ashley Barnes leaving. But if they left, then again, it's beginning to look very, very difficult. And Norwich are then in a position where they can't name a full bench of players because they haven't got an appropriate sort of homegrown quota. So that is going to have to be a consideration, not just in January, but in markets moving forward as well. Clearly, in sort of summer markets, you're benefited by the fact you can get a few more players on sort of free transfers and they're out of contract. So that helps. So I think we're probably going to be looking mostly, maybe barring a loan type situation, if one of those arrived that maybe was Premier League fitting and was the right player, then you could see Norwich doing one like that. Say if Kate Gordon goes, then that would give them an opportunity maybe for a bit of a like for like replacement. But I think in terms of those permanent sort of long-term arrivals, I could see them coming on the continent or from anywhere really. I mean, Norwich recruited from Bulgaria, from Austria in the summer, so it shows that kind of all markets are open. I know they've looked very closely in South Korea in times gone by without actually signing anyone. We've just spoken about South America, so we're talking about a global operation now. So I don't think really you can discount any part of the globe as to where maybe these offers could come. But I think in terms of value for money, in terms of where the squad's at right now, it'll probably be arrivals on the continent. And clearly the flip side, the homegrown stuff, is if you can get Christian Fashnak, for example, off the books, then that opens up a slot where you can just go and add in another player from the continent without obviously worrying too much about the homegrown stuff. So yeah, it's going to be dependent to an extent on what happens and who goes out and what other situations kind of evolve throughout the window. But I would, as we sit here right now, I would say that I'd probably be more surprised to see someone from the domestic market arrive at Norwich City than I would be someone from potentially overseas.
I'll dim to a few comments before we come around to predictions. Jeffman saying, do you think the club are regretting turning down a Ruddy return? If that was ever in the pipeline, can't see he's had much action at Newcastle. Decent wages, though. And I suppose that lends itself back to the point around Norwich obviously not carrying a massive squad and too many individuals that won't play. Obviously, I imagine Ruddy's wages would still be of a relative size for a club like Norwich. If he's not going to be playing and he's only going to be a backup, I mean, it lends itself back to the point of, would he want to come here and just sit on the bench? But then obviously you got the George Long situation. So sort of, I suppose of all that in hindsight, probably a deal that was never going to get done.
Yeah, and one that I think was probably a little bit overstated, if I'm honest, in the summer. I'm not sure quite how genuine all of that stuff was. I'm sure from John Ruddy's perspective with the situation, we know that he's remained in Norfolk since leaving Norwich. I'm sure he would have liked and probably did have a conversation at some point to say, look, I'm available. Can I help? Is there something I can do here? And that clearly wasn't taken up upon. I don't think that's maybe the sort of advanced situation that maybe it was suggested to be. And I think from Norwich City's perspective with their new strategy, if you come out and say, right, we're going to sign a load of young players and we're going to embark on this bold new destination, we should ignore John Ruddy. He's not part. So you can kind of see why, for the same reasons they didn't initially sign Emiliano Marcondes, it would have affected, I think, the narrative a little bit if they'd have gone in that direction. And it probably, doesn't send the best message out to George Long, who at this moment in time, whether people like it or not, is the number 2. So, yeah, I'm not quite sure how advanced those things were. I think there's probably more likelihood of Jack Ruddy, his son, who's doing very well in the academy at the moment. And as I sort of gather, is pretty highly rated. He's only 17. So, yeah, I think there's probably more chance of him breaking through in the near future rather than his dad, who clearly has had let's be honest, a very, very good very good move for him financially at this stage of his career, and in terms of security, it makes a whole load of sense. So yeah, even though he's not getting game time, I think it's probably worked out quite well for him.
Yeah, another question from Jeffman, classic line from him. Completely missed Cordova's goal on Sunday. I was halfway through eating my Carrow Road sausage roll. Any fun anecdotes on how you've missed a Norwich goal? I know for a fact, Connor, you missed one.
Yeah.
You can probably relay the story now, and quite a big goal as well.
Yeah, so my first game in this job, which you're never going to forget anyway, but I was fortunate enough that it was that Manchester City game, the 3-2 win under Daniel Farke, which was quite an incredible way to begin life in this role. And yeah, I was obviously a little bit more wet behind the ears than I even am now. But in that situation, and yourself, Adam, you kind of teach yourself, when to type, when to do separate things, and when you need to be watching, and sometimes you can sort of do both. And obviously I didn't have those practices at the time, so Norwich won a corner obviously, and the first goal was Kenny McLean thumping header near post at the corner against Manchester City, and I was obviously typing, I think, what had happened for Norwich City to win the corner. And by the time I sort of looked, I heard obviously the reaction to the ball hitting the net and looked up, and everyone was up and celebrating around me, and I wasn't quite sure what had happened. So that was a nice lesson early on, to always make sure that you pick your moments as to when to type. And actually, I nearly missed the third goal as well. When Buendia obviously pinched it off Otamendi, I think it was similar thing. I was typing, but thankfully Tony, who was in your role at the time, made what I can only describe as a squeal sort of noise, and that prompted me to look up, and then I saw Buendia put it across for Pukki to put in. So I didn't miss that one, thankfully, but I nearly missed 2 goals in that game, which would have been quite something on probably one of Norwich City's greatest wins of the last decade or so.
Yeah, there's nothing that really springs to mind. I mean, definitely down the years I've been in the concourse at different points at half time, and then tried to make my way up, and Norwich have scored an early goal in the second half, and I've missed it. But there's no key goals, and I've never missed kind of a magnitude goal of Manchester City.
Well, I've got a good one. It's not me personally, but my dad did miss the Tim Closer header against Ipswich, which I know is a lot of people did. But obviously Norwich had gone behind in, what was it like? It was in stoppage time, wasn't it, when Luke Chambers scored the header, and that was it for him. He was up. He said, I can't see them win here. So he went, and I think he watched the rest of the game from sort of in the concourse. They obviously have the TVs, and he was watching from there. And then obviously, and to be honest, I don't really understand why I didn't follow him, because in that sort of situation, I was with my sister as well, but we both stayed. And I think there was something that just said to me, just wait a minute, you never know, just wait for a minute, and then if something else unfolds or an attack breaks down, then get out of there. but clearly then Closer scored, and I don't think I've seen him move as fast before or since. And he appeared from the steps in celebration, and yeah, it was quite good. But he missed the Tim Closer header goal, which I'm sure quite a few Norwich fans did.
Yeah, there's definitely videos of Norwich fans outside Carrow Road on that day, I think. As Harry said, I doubt Norwich have sent the FA a Christmas card this year. I'd imagine that's been on the block list. Somebody's off to Sunderland on Saturday. I mean, any Norwich fan making that long old trip a few days before Christmas is deserving of pretty big credit, because as we know, that's certainly not a short trip, and it does mark the start of a pretty busy festive period now coming up for Norwich. I think it's 5 games in 17 days. As Joe points out, we've obviously got to get through this Christmas period. There's lots of difficult games, Sunderland away, Millwall at home, and just to read out these 5 games, Connor, obviously, as I mentioned, Sunderland away there, Millwall at home, QPR at home, Luton away, Coventry at home. I mean, 3 home games in there, and obviously a trip to Luton, which is a little bit, in terms of distance, not quite so far for us as Sunderland. So how do Norwich need to deal with these next 5 games? Is this going to be the key, I suppose, moment in the season into whether they could still try and push for top 6, or maybe they're going to be more where we expect them to be in the middle of the park, I suppose, for the rest of the season?
Before we get on to that, do you want to tell everyone the story of how we shared a very romantic Boxing Day McDonald's together after that game at Luton?
Yeah, that was, I think, probably the lowest point I've ever had in this job. Norwich suffered that pretty grim 2-1 defeat. I think Luton were down to 10 men, and obviously they managed to get the winner through Corley Woodrow. And we kind of, I think, knew post-match, anybody who's watched Dean Smith's post-match from that game, that it was probably the end of the road. I think Paddy was heading back to London because he was sort of seeing family down there around Christmas, and Sam was obviously more based in that neck of the woods anyway. So me and you had the trip back to Norfolk alone. We spent 30 minutes walking through the streets of Luton to get back to the car, and sort of had fingers crossed that the car was still in peace, and obviously didn't maybe...
and us.
Yeah, us, yeah, which is not ideal. Then we get to the car, we hit the road, and then we pull into a McDonald's in Royston for some food, because I don't think we got any food at Luton that night, and the bellies were getting a little bit hungry. We pull in, we see Pete Dye, the kitman, and
legend,
somebody else, I think, in that van at the point as well. They were ordering their McDonald's in front of us, and we both just looked at each other and sort of just wanted to cry into our McDonald's, because we knew that the next day, I think, was going to be a little bit of a busy one with Dean Smith inevitably getting the boot, which it turned out to be the case. So yeah, that was eventful.
It's the saddest quarter pounder I've ever had. I'm not sure we made eye contact during that or even said anything, but very bizarrely, when we pulled up to, obviously you got the drive-through windows, and they were playing, like, I don't know if you remember, like really loud. It was almost like opening the window to a nightclub. It was almost like a party atmosphere, but because like the rest, can you call it a restaurant at McDonald's, because it wasn't open, you just had to go through the drive-through. So that was sort of the only interaction we had. But yeah, that followed by what we'd seen at Norwich, followed by at Kenilworth Road, followed by a half an hour walk through the middle of Luton at that time of night. Yeah, it was a pretty depressing night, all told, wasn't it?
It was indeed, yeah. And I suppose we've got to hope that the trip there on New Year's Day is going to be a little bit more bright. But what's the points tally, I suppose, Connor, for these next 5 games? Because, as I mentioned, it's going to be a key period in the season. They're only still, 8 points, I think, outside the playoffs. There's inevitably still a route there. I mean, I looked kind of back, actually, at the table from this time last year, and it's very similar, actually, in terms of Norwich, in terms of the points haul and where they were away from the playoffs. It can be done. Obviously, Sargent's coming back as well, so there's a possibility that that's going to be a key pillar in the second half of the season. So, yeah, I suppose, how big are the next 5 and a points tally?
Well, yeah, big. I think this time of year is always really interesting because it can change your season if you have a really good festive period. And Norwich kind of did last year from memory, I think, without sort of looking at, maybe you're going to correct me and say they were horrendous, but from memory, they had a pretty good one. I remember a win against Sheffield Wednesday. They lost at West Brom, didn't they? But there were some good results in there as well. And I think it's the home ones, isn't it? The Boxing Day against Millwall, the 29th against QPR. I think they've got to win both, if I'm honest. And I think Saturday's going to be really difficult. I think Luton, again, we could be in a position where we're talking about a new manager, but we said that last time Norwich played Luton. So I think if it's the Luton that rocked up at Carrow Road a few weeks ago, then there's every opportunity that Norwich could go there and take 3 points as well. But so that I'm sort of got in my head 7 from those 3. So the two home games and then a draw at Luton. Is that the 5? What am I missing? So I've got Sunderland,
Coventry at home.
I think they could draw that as well. So I'll say 8 from that festive period, but I might be going a bit too short. What's yours?
Yeah, I think I'm going to veer towards 10 just because they've got the 3 home games. I fancy them to win. Maybe not win at Luton, but certainly get a draw or win that game and draw against Coventry. That's kind of where my head's at. I know that's maybe a little bit optimistic off the basis of what we've seen more recently, but yeah, I just got an inclination that Norwich might have a pretty good festive window. I mean, you mentioned obviously last year. I think they had a few slightly negative results. Remember they lost at Millwall 1-0.
Yeah. See, it's amazing how many games you erase from your head.
The Southampton New Year's Day game, which was
they didn't have a good festive period at all.
Probably the worst game I've ever seen in terms of football and style. So yeah, it can only get, I suppose, a little bit better from that. Jeffman feeling they'll get 7 points from that. Draw against Millwall, win against QPR and Luton. Harry thinking 9 points out of the next 15, which of course would be a pretty good return. And I suppose that lends itself now to the prediction point. How do you see this game unfolding first and foremost at the Stadium of Light? I mean, kind of look back at recent times, and Norwich had that win there with Josh Sargent scoring under Dean Smith. There was the 3-1 in the Premier League, which I actually posted on our X account this morning. They've had a few good results down the years, but they've also had last year where they were absolutely dire. Obviously they managed to get the early goal through Wang and then sat back and obviously tried to protect that lead and lost 3-1. So with all that context, how do you see the game unfolding on Saturday?
Yeah, I spoke to Ujio Huang that day. That was quite something. With hindsight, that was quite something. Yeah, look, I think it's going to be difficult, isn't it? For all the reasons that we spoke about, Sunderland's home record, where Norwich are at in terms of some key players missing, probably going to be without Angus Gunn on top of that. I think this probably is going to be a difficult one. So then it's about performances. I don't think it's beyond the realms that Norwich could go there and win, and we know what the best version of Norwich looks like, and it's capable of going toe to toe with some of these teams. You look at the results they've picked up against Leeds and Sheffield United, and obviously Blackburn, who are up there at this moment in time as well. This is the first time they've played, I think, from memory, a team inside the top 6 away from home. So it's going to be a slightly different challenge. We know Norwich struggles on the road, so I think this will be tough. I think there will be goals. I'm going to go for a very rogue 3-2 Sunderland win. What about you, Adam?
Yeah, I'm not going to go quite as many goals, but I unfortunately think Norwich will veer on the wrong side of a positive result. Going to go 2-1 Sunderland, which, I just think their home form is so strong. Norwich's away form is not great, and always there's always stats there to be broken, and Norwich could go there and pull up a performance. But off the basis of what we've seen so far, I think those home games, the other side of Christmas, are probably the two that I'm targeting more as kind of the route, I suppose, to picking up points over this festive period. But of course, we hopefully will be wrong, and Norwich can go up there and make.
We usually are.
Good show. Yeah, we are. So, hopefully there's something there to give. Late question here. Do we think Norwich regret letting go of Sam McCallum? I don't think he's featured a lot for Sheffield United.
Not for me.
No. I think, unfortunately, with the situation they're in, I mean, I think left back obviously is an area they'll address in the summer as well. So I'm intrigued to see how they move forward with that. I mean, it probably moves it forward before we round off the show. Obviously, we've got this app offer going as well at the moment. Colin, just want to quickly plug where people can find that.
Yeah, all the details of that are at pinken.com. Obviously, it's I think there may be some people who are looking for Christmas presents or late Christmas presents. Then that's definitely the way to go. It's a really good offer. Well, we think it's a really good offer. Whether you agree or not is up for you, but is up to you. But it's £15 for all of 2025, and that includes obviously all of our exclusive content, all of our columnists, Chris Sutton, Ewan Roberts, Chris Gorham. We've got as well some brilliant content in there. All of the stuff that we produce around a match day. You get again more of us rambling. So if that's the kind of thing that you like, then do come and join us. And if you know a Norwich City fan who maybe needs a Christmas present, then hey, that's a good little stocking filler for them. And we think it's really good value. We've got a nice little sort of community building over there now, and hopefully there'll be more of you that come and join us, because we hope that is the case, and hopefully it'll be a nice eventful run to the playoffs that we're commenting on in the second half of the season. But irrespective of what it is, we'll be there guiding you through it, and hopefully it's something that people feel is worth the value of it, and you can take free trials out and all that good stuff. So go to pinken.com, click the subscribe tab in the top right, and you'll find all the details there.
Yeah, and any pre-existing or new subscribers have a chance to win 2 hospitality tickets for the home game against Swansea. So well worth keeping an eye on that, because it's a pretty good prize to win. And as Jeff mentioned, I haven't actually forgot about this, the 10k sub giveaway. It's been in the back of my mind. I think once we hit 10k, I was off for a week, and then since then it's just been game and press conference. So I think we might leave it till the new year now. Get this Christmas one out of the way with, and then we'll do a bit bigger one maybe in the new year. Definitely haven't forgot about it. It's on the list. So top man Jeffman, well worth the money on the Pink and App subscription. We've not paid him to do that. We've not paid him in sausage rolls either. So maybe we'll have to do that at some point. He'll give us even more praise. So with that, we're going to sign off. Of course, we're making a long trip to Sunderland. So if you're not there, we've got all the usual coverage across this game. Of course, we'll have team news live. Connor will be on the live blog. We've got a lot of other build-up stuff as well ahead of this game. Johannes Torp's full press conference is now available on the YouTube channel. Speaking to a Sunderland fan later on today, so I'll put that up on the YouTube channel as well tonight. So a little bit more insight there on the Black Cats to come your way as well. So plenty of good stuff to get your teeth into. And of course, I have all the post-match reaction and fallout from this game from Torp, Connor's verdict, etc., etc. So keep it locked to our channels and the YouTube channel between now and then. And let's hope it's a good festive cheer maybe for Norwich ahead of the Christmas games at Carrow Road, and potential opportunity for more points. So with that, we're going to sign off. Of course, we wish you and your families a healthy and happy Christmas. We probably won't be seeing you on one of these preview shows before then. So fingers crossed you get everything you want, and hopefully we get 3 points for Norwich on Saturday, and of course the 2 games at home after that. So with that, we'll see you very shortly when we get to Sunderland on Saturday.